So to begin with, let's drop in on the Annapolis Quilt Guild. The women in this Maryland group are so devoted to quilting that they hold 3-day retreats so that they can pursue their craft without interruption. It's not just the fabrics, the designs, and the challenge that keeps them making quilts. It's also the bonds they form with their fellow quilters. Want to know what really goes into a quilt? Take a look.
The women of the Annapolis, Maryland Quilt Guild have given a whole new twist to the expression, a girl's night out.
We're having a pajama party for grown-up women. It's marvelous. It's really nice to be able to get away from cleaning your house and making food and being responsible for other people's needs.
Kathleen Kelm and her fellow quilters play hooky from their family responsibilities twice a year for this. A 3-day quilting retreat at a spot overlooking the Annapolis harbor. The ladies, armed with their sewing machines, fabrics, and creativity, spend a few days together sewing, laughing, and learning from each other.
I think a lot of quilting ladies tend to be busybodies. We talk a lot, we know people. And that makes it possible to really get some very good problem solving.
Quilting, it turns out, is about much more than just making bed covers. For 68-year-old Veronica Klein, it was a way to reconnect with people after her husband passed away.
I'm now a widow, so by joining the Guild and coming to retreats, I've connected with a lot of wonderful ladies who quilt and inspire you and really encourage you not to give up.
For Lipscomb, who organized this year's retreat, quilting provided an important new outlet.
I know in my case, it became school, work, home, school, work, home, so it was never, and my world began to shrink down. And as I got into quilting and embroidery and other things, it began to open up.
Dolores and Fran have attended many of these retreats over the last decade. The mother and daughter pair love to quilt together. Fran remembers affectionately when her 75-year-old mother tried to introduce her to quilting years ago.
You bought me a kit.
Yeah, that's right. I did get her like a bedspread.
And I hated it. They were these awful calicos. In the 70s, the fabrics were all of these little flowery things, that I didn't find very appealing at all. But quilting was just beginning its resurgence then. So Mom bought me this kit, and I hated the fabric. It was so awful. So it took forever to applique these awful flowers on the top. And then I was faced with trying to do the actual quilting, joining the layers together. And I found I loved it.
That's typical of what many quilters say. Once they try it, they're hooked on it. Today, these women are changing the image of quilting stitch by stitch. Simply put, this is not your grandmother's quilting anymore. After enjoying a revival in the early 1970s, the quilting industry is now thriving. According to a survey conducted every 3 years by Quilts Incorporated, there are more than 21 million quilters in the United States today. That is almost double the number in the early 1990s. Quilting is now a $2 billion a year industry.
Well, we talk about how the pioneer women used to travel with old clothes that they would cut up to make their quilts and a needle, and they were very fortunate to have a needle. Today's quilters have very expensive computer-based sewing machines. I own 4 of those. We come with laptops. We have special lights that we use.
But some things haven't changed. 99% of quilters are still women, and the average age of a quilter is 58. Kathleen Kelm isn't surprised by any of those figures. Her guild has nearly 300 members. 1/3 of them are age 65 and older. She says anyone can quilt regardless of age or physical limitations.
It would be an interesting test to ask anybody in this room right now if they don't have arthritis to put their hand up. I think it's probably 95% of the population, speaking as a registered nurse, in here has arthritis. So that's probably why we're not doing biathlons, but we're sitting on chairs and sewing instead.
Quilting is defined as sewing 3 layers of material together. Aside from the wonderful and varied work that it produces, the act of quilting has at least 3 benefits. First, it helps to keep the mind sharp as a person ages.
For me, quilting is many things. It's certainly a creative outlet. You get to play with fabric, play with color, make up designs. I like sewing. There's something very, very peaceful about that. But it's also a part of women's heritage, women's history.
Second, there's the physical benefit of using your hands and body to craft a quilt.
People get tired working on a quilt because they're getting exercise doing it. This is, you know, people are taking breaks in here because this is work. And it's good for your stamina. You're having to sit, you breathe well.
Third, and perhaps most important, there's the social interaction among quilters.
I get around the quilters and I can feel my heart smile. I can feel it just smile.
Quilting can also be a comfort during times of sorrow. Kathleen Kelm found solace in quilting after a personal tragedy.
I had a loss. I had a horrific loss. And when my 20-year-old son killed himself, and I was faced with trying to figure out how to breathe, you know, how to go on, I quilted. I sewed, and sewed very badly, and just made endless strips and sewed them together. And I couldn't think about how much I missed him and still keep the edges of the fabric right next to the foot on the sewing machine. And so I kept that foot there. And when I say that I got my life together 1 foot at a time, it was a sewing machine foot. And gradually the spirit starts to heal as long as your hands are busy.
Quilters believe that they leave a little bit of themselves in every inch of fabric they sew.
All my friends were having babies, and I was making a lot of baby quilts. I think in the last 5 years I've made 30 of them. It was me sewing a bit of myself in good hopes and good thoughts for the babies, and the joy of their coming, and love for their mothers, and just wanting something warm and cuddly and cozy for the babies to be wrapped in.
It's a hug, you know. There's a cliche that people repeat, that they'll spend Grandpa's money, but they'll fight over Grandma's quilts. They are held onto, they are cherished.
There are hundreds of local quilting guilds across the country. There are also many classes offered to teach beginners new to the craft.
Well, it's a nice pastime, and keeps you busy, gives you something to do. And I think just start on something small. Anybody can do it. Start on something small, and then you'll probably get hooked on it.
I found that people who do crafts and quilting, embroidery, and everything else are very open, they're very giving, and they're very kind, and they don't mind beginners.
And it gives you an opportunity to grow and to enjoy and to tap into a creative side maybe you don't even know you had. There's no wrong way to quilt. There are no quilt police, so just go and have fun.
Within this room, generations of women will continue to work together, creating art and love through fabrics. Memories from this retreat will carry them over until the next one, when they may welcome new quilters into the fold. Veronica Klein's granddaughter now quilts, and it's something the two can share. There's a saying that quilters age a little more slowly because they are still playing. With dexterity of hands, sharp minds, and youthful spirits, the ladies of the Annapolis Quilt Guild are reaping every bit as much as they sow.
We're fortunate to have with us today guests who can give us a better understanding of quilts, quilting, and quilters. Shiras, Guion, and Brousil are members of the Annapolis Quilt Guild. They are also part of the Milltown Quilters of Maryland, and Shiras belongs to the Baltimore Applique Society. Pat served as one of the first presidents of the National Quilt Association. Thank you both for being here. How would you actually define quilting?
Well, I guess technically it's 3 layers sewn together. 3 layers of fabric that are attached together. We use the middle layers normally as a batting. It gives it the warmth.
Sure. I see here that you've actually brought with you an unfinished quilt. Right. Tell me a little bit about how long does it take a quilt to actually get finished?
Depends on the size of the quilt and whether you're doing it by hand or by machine. And this particular one is being done by machine, so it goes faster.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because in the piece, I felt like it might have taken a little bit of the magic out of quilting with all the new technology that seems to be involved. No, not so much?
No, you just create a little faster.
You create a little faster. But it's not that sort of ebb and flow of creating a quilt that brings the joy to you?
Yes, you get all of that in doing it. We're using the machine to make the stitches rather than our fingers. And as our fingers get a little older, the machines help a lot.
I see, okay. And I know a lot of mature adults love to quilt. Why do you think that is?
I think probably because they have the time, finally. You know, they're not raising children. My daughter would love to quilt, but she works full-time. Sure. And she's got a little daughter, too, so, you know.
What different types of traditional quilt patterns are there? I know you brought a few, actually.
Well,
let me show some of them.
This is an applique pattern. This is a copy of a block that was on a quilt made in about 1848.
Okay.
It's a particular style.
And you didn't make it in 1848, right?
No, not this one.
Just kidding.
That technique is good. It's a Baltimore album quilt. There was a special kinds of designs made in Baltimore for about 10 years only. I just thought this is, it's bright.
Right.
And it's very popular today. We still make copies of these quilts.
Well, you talked about it being in it from 1848. What role do quilts actually play in terms of history?
A lot of women they couldn't vote. They weren't allowed to express opinions. And you will look in some of the old quilts, and there are political cartoons, if you will. They expressed opinions in their quilts.
So there's hidden meaning behind
some of them. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That's so interesting.
They knew what was going on, and they had opinions. It was also a decorative thing. And I think quilts also were a way of women. The women got together. They shared things. It formed a sort of a community in quilting. That's the big thing.
Yeah, talking about that, I know that in the piece we talked about the bond amongst women who are quilting still today. How has the role of quilting changed over the years?
Well, the techniques are totally different than we use today. I mean, you know, this particular piece was done with an embroidery machine, computer hooked up to a sewing machine.
So what did you do?
Change the thread.
Change the thread?
That's about it.
Wow.
That particular one. Right.
Wow.
And choose the pattern and where it's going to be centered. And
yeah, but you know, the traditional ones look quite hard. Is it hard to quilt?
It takes time.
It takes time.
And it does take practice. You don't make little circles correctly the first time. Or maybe even the 10th or the 20th. But it takes practice.
What basic skills does one need to quilt?
I think probably more than anything else, just the desire to want to do it. Because there are so many techniques out there that what I like to do might not be what Shiras wants to do or someone else wants to do.
And that's based on color, that's based on pattern, that's based on size, use of the quilt, those kind of things, right? Right. We talked a little bit about technology, and for mature adults who may be our viewers, I assume some of them maybe have gripping or dexterity problems.
Yes.
What are some of the other areas of quilting that are helped by this? Like mentally, I would think it would be a wonderful joy.
Oh, the math in it. Yeah.
Yes, and you have to solve the problem. I mean, you have to, it's kind of a puzzle putting it together.
And
what do you mean? Wait, what do you mean by that?
This one is definitely a puzzle
Let's
because
look at
I
a
made
puzzle.
the blocks first.
Okay.
And then I had to figure out how I was going to put the pieces together. But all of these pieces had to fit together in there. So there are different size pieces, so I had to draw it out on paper.
Wow. You know, I never really thought about that whole thing.
And the color. Look, this is a light color, this is a dark color. How does this fit? She's bordered these with red to bring out the red. I mean, there's a lot of thought and creativity.
Absolutely. So it helps from a mental standpoint.
with yes,
it's
very definitely.
Great mental stimulation.
Yeah, really.
And problem solving.
Problem solving, the mental, and you certainly have to have some sense of style, I think. I'm not sure I could actually put that whole thing together.
Well, sometimes you put it together and it's not right, and you take it apart and get to do it again.
Wow. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with you guys. Stay with us because we'll be back in a moment to continue our conversation about quilting with Shiras, Guion, and Pat Brousil.
True or false? The craft of quilting was originated here in the United States. Do you know the answer? It's false. The roots of quilting actually date back to the ancient Egyptians.
Welcome back to the Daily Apple. We've been talking about the art of quilting with Shiras, Guion, and Pat Brousil of the Annapolis Quilt Guild. And returning to the Daily Apple to join our conversation is Betty Belanis, an education specialist with the Smithsonian Institution's Office of Folklife and Cultural Heritage in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, Betty.
Thank you.
Tell me, you work with, you're in the folklorist,
yes.
and you work with a lot of quilters. What do you do with them?
Well, we do the Folklife Festival here in Washington, D.C. every summer, and we very often feature quilters because it's one of the crafts that just about every state and area of the country has.
And I understand it's the 400th anniversary of the Jamestown exhibition?
Yes, this summer we're featuring Virginia and English culture in celebration of the 400th anniversary of the settlers coming to Jamestown.
Will there be commemorative quilts there?
Yes, actually we've been working with some commemorative quilters. There's one absolutely fantastic quilt in Reedville, Virginia, on the northern neck that they've actually sent, the quilters have sent back to England for English quilters to quilt on, and then back to Reedville and back and forth, and it features a kind of hands across the ocean pattern. It's fabulous.
Oh, wow. And you brought a quilt I see here today, and you were telling me that this is one of the most famous quilts or most famous patterns?
Most famous patterns. That's called Sunbonnet Sue. Everybody's got a Sunbonnet Sue, and everybody makes a Sunbonnet Sue.
What happens from a vision standpoint with eyesight? We talked a little bit about, you know, hands being nimble and maybe unable, and the technology helps that. But vision, you know, a lot of mature adults lose their eyesight. How does that affect quilting?
Well, we use magnifying glasses.
Do some of the machines actually have magnifying glasses, or should we invent that? They do?
No. There's a magnifying thing that fits on the sewing machine.
Really?
They have lamps that have them on there too.
Really?
So that you can see your stitches a little better because the eyes get a little old.
So you can do that well into your later years. Is it expensive, the hobby?
Not particularly expensive, but as you start, you want to do this pattern and that pattern. You buy this fabric and that fabric, and your stash of fabrics kind of gets a little large.
Betty, the story. Tell me a little bit about why you think some quilts actually tell a story and why there is folklore and history to it.
Well, this quilt, for instance, is one that a friend's mother did for my daughter when she was born, and so quilts become family heirlooms, as well as we were talking earlier about quilts being historically, the patterns being historical and telling a story. And now people are actually doing things like scanning photographs, scanning their family photographs in on cloth and incorporating them into a quilt.
Can you actually hand me that piece that you have, and I want us to tell a little bit more about it?
I brought this. I'm not a quilter by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm making a T-shirt quilt for my daughter now, and she'll be going off to college in a couple of years. And this is an example of how people are now, as in the past, using the materials at hand, using something that was a piece of clothing and recycling it, which quilting really in the older days and even now people do. They take an old dress or an old T-shirt or whatever and make a quilt out of it.
That's lovely, and what I'm hearing from you, and I'd love for you two to chime in on this, it seems very intergenerational. It seems like something you can leave as a legacy.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I mean, I've been teaching quilting for 30 years, but I've been quilting longer than that. And the sense of camaraderie with other people, people who are older than you, younger than you know, we all have the same thing in common.
You know what I love about it is, and it was just coming to me, what a beautiful gift. Rather than buying something, it's a wonderful gift that keeps on giving, and especially in the holiday season.
Well, the panda quilt is exactly that. My niece had a baby, her husband is from China, and so that was the reason for doing the pandas.
Oh, wow. So there's a cultural little twist to it. Now, I heard that one of you can tell me a little bit about the mathematical formula that goes into it, the T word.
Oh, the tessellations.
Oh, the tessellations.
Tessellations.
Yeah. The quilt that was on the end.
The quilt that was, with the cats. Yeah, we don't have that here anymore, but...
It actually, a tessellation is the same shape that interlocks. And if you look at that quilt, it's all the same shape. The shape happens to be kind of a stylized cat, but the dark ones and the bright ones are all the same.
So did you figure out that pattern? Or?
No, no.
Is that folklore? No. Who figured out that pattern?
A lady in Virginia.
Is it like the Coca-Cola formula and nobody's supposed to know what it is?
No, a tessellation is actually a mathematical tradition.
Oh.
I mean, you know, a square is actually a triangle because you can fit them together with leaving no spaces. And the cat is just a fancy one.
So you can go to a store, a fabric store, and find patterns if you're... Yes. How do you begin if you're a novice? For instance, with Betty, what's the best thing for her to do as a novice?
Probably take a class. Probably take a class, and there are lots of them out there. We offer classes through our quilting guild. There are quilt shops that offer lots of classes. You know, chain stores offer classes. There are groups in senior citizens and all that have classes.
That's great. So just to kind of sum up, it sounds like a great activity for mature adults from a mental health perspective,
Yes.
in terms of time and enjoying each other. That's great. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.